Denver Broncos running back Tyler Badie is back in Denver. That's the good news. But the bad news, they could be without him for some time. So what personnel decisions could the team make if he misses time? We'll break that down and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger over there, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Make sure you check out our written work exclusively, milehighsports.com, predominantlyorange.com. Follow us on social media, and a special thanks to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thanks for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day. You can get Locked On Broncos for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So if you haven't done so already, subscribe or follow so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. And look, Broncos Country, here's what you can expect on today's episode of the show as we go through and we look at maybe some personnel moves the Broncos could make ahead of Week 5 as the Las Vegas Raiders come to town. What areas could they upgrade the roster from the practice squad if a spot does open up here? On top of that, who gets a game ball offensively and defensively for Sunday's performance against the New York Jets? And more importantly, we're going to kick things off here on today's episode of the show, highlighting the latest news on Broncos running back Tyler Badie. What's the latest status with him? Well, you're going to get that here on today's episode of the show. Sayre, let's kick things off here with obviously the news everybody I think in Broncos Country was wanting to know. Very scary scene in New York on Sunday with Tyler Badie being stretchered off. There really wasn't much of an update from the Broncos after the game. Sean Payton didn't share anything with us. Luckily on Monday morning, Ian Rappaport at NFL Network gave us some news on Tyler Badie and his potential status here with the team going forward.
Yeah, sounds like he has movement in all his extremities and was on a flight back to Denver after the team flight. I think we saw Brandon Cristal say that he was on his commercial flight back, which I guess probably just means that he had to go through additional testing and all these sorts of things before coming back to Denver, obviously. But Ian Rappaport did say that IR, even if it's short term, could be an option here for the Denver Broncos. Like you said, could see some roster shuffling here ahead of Week 5 where the Broncos have a matchup at home against the Las Vegas Raiders. Unfortunately, it doesn't sound like they're going to have Tyler Badie available for that game. But, I mean, if anything, it sounds like he's maybe avoided worst case scenario, which is something that's season ending or something that's obviously even more serious than that. So it's all in all, I would say, a positive news update as far as the scary scene that we saw where Badie, I mean, it seemed like you said on the post game, things were kind of just getting worse there on the sideline.
Yeah, and look, I also felt like with Ian Rappaport's tweet, kind of seemed like there was a little bit of ambiguity. Look, we talked to Broncos head coach Sean Payton Monday morning on a Zoom conference call as we normally do following Sunday games. And he just said, we appreciate the concern that everybody had for him. He flew back. He's in Denver. They're going to go through and evaluate what their options are. Rappaport's tweet, I mean, obviously didn't rule out IR, but said could be back this season. So it's like we don't know if it's how serious it is, things along that line structurally. I just know that there was a lot of concern. So I'm sure here in the next 48 to 72 hours, we'll probably gain some clarity. Don't expect him this week to play here for the Broncos. So that kind of now leads to our next conversation. You're okay, hey, if Badie does miss, because look, he was elevated to the 53-man roster last week, and there was an expected, I'd say, elevated role for him in the running back rotation, considering how the run game has been for Denver early on in the season. And then we started to see Javonte Williams, Jaleel, McLaughlin. They got going against a very good defensive front of the New York Jets on Sunday, especially in that second half. So some things to potentially build off of. But now it begs the question here. If you are the Broncos, do you maybe look at elevating Blake Watson? I mean, not elevating him. He's on the active roster. Do you activate him this week because of Badie's injury? Or do you keep him as an inactive? And do you continue to ride with Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin exclusively as the primary ball carriers here for the offensive side of the ball? Because keep in mind, Audric Estime, don't think he'll be back this week, could be back next week here for Denver.
Well, we're excited to see Estime back on the field because he's got a lot of promise and he's got the ability to really change the dynamic of the offense with his ability to create yardage after contact. But to your question about Blake Watson, Cody, I would see what he's got. I would activate him, give him a couple of touches, and see what he can do out there. Unless the Broncos are planning on going really heavy at wide receiver or something like that, or maybe they want to call up a tight end and see if they can get something going there. Because man, that's something we'll have to talk about as the week goes along. Just absolutely nothing going for the Denver Broncos at the tight end position right now. I wouldn't be surprised to see Blake Watson get some run because look, he's got the athletic traits, he's got the ability after the catch, and he's really a great pass catcher. That's kind of what drew the Broncos or any NFL team to him in the first place. A former wide receiver who transitioned to the running back position in college and transitioned very well to the running back position. So he's got those tools and traits to be able to make a contribution there. And the Broncos kept him on the 53 for a reason. Look, if you're down this many backs, you might as well give the guy a shot now that the opportunity has arisen.
Well, now it's going to also create questions, though, too, when Estime is eligible to return, which I think all signs point to him being activated next week. So what roster move are you going to make to bring him off of IR? Or is this something where the Broncos maybe hold on a bit? Like if Tyler Badie is a candidate for injured reserve, do you make a move this week or do you make that move next week where you place him on IR and then promote, obviously, Estime from IR to back to the active roster versus having to cut another player? I mean, I'm looking across the board, and we'll certainly dive into this here today. Denver does, maybe have some room to make some roster moves here to give the best, I'd say, opportunity for them to compete going forward. Certainly at some positions on the offensive side of the ball. You already have a guy in Watson on the 53, so do you see what he can bring to the table this week against the Raiders? I don't know. Or do you just ride the hot hand? We very well could see Watson get his first look, but I don't know if he's there just yet in terms of where Sean Payton and the coaching staff want him to be in terms of getting reps in a meaningful regular season game, even though they don't want to play the risk of losing him on waivers if he has to go through that whole process as well with some of the other teams that maybe had their eye on him in the preseason last year. So you look at the status around the NFL, there's injuries piling up, and certainly maybe you lose a guy like Watson to waivers. Certainly don't want to take that risk, but at what cost, right? When you look at how you manage this roster as it is right now, where you need to upgrade certain positions, definitely a dilemma I think that, the Broncos have here on their hands. Obviously, maybe some news that pertains to the run game getting going a little bit in Sunday's game. Sean Payton did tell us on Monday that he did give Quinn Miners a game ball there, and I went back and I was watching the tape on the All-22. My film review will come out of Mile High Sports on the offense and defense this week. Miner's still manhandling some dudes, and it's fun to see. I think he and Alex Palczewski together, those guys are playing really good football. So there are some things I think that we can look forward to here as the season progresses. But speaking of the subject of game balls, Sayre and I, we sat down, we watched the game back here once again. We're going to hand out our game balls here on today's episode of the show, including one player catching Bo Nix's first career passing touchdown. Kind of spoils it there for you as well, but we'll tell you why Courtland Sutton is one of our game ball recipients, and we'll hand out our others here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and the NFL season is here, and NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. The Broncos, they open up this week against the Las Vegas Raiders at home, where they're going to don the throwback jerseys as 2.5-point home favorites for this matchup. If you think they're going to win on the money line, you think they're going to cover the spread, you can get involved in that inside of the FanDuel Sportsbook app. You can put together parlays from multiple games to see if you can stack things up. I always do anytime touchdown scores. I like to put 4 players I think will score a touchdown every Sunday, and I'll throw $10 at that. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Once again, when you place your first $5 bet, you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Check it out today at FanDuel.com. Once again, that's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook.
Courtland Sutton gets a game ball since he didn't get to keep that touchdown pass, that first touchdown thrown from Bo Nix there in week 4, the win against the New York Jets. But who else is getting a game ball for the Denver Broncos here after they've won now 2 in a row? Cody, things are getting exciting, and I know Broncos Country is pumped about the win, reading through the comments of our post-game episode. And hey, thanks so much for all of you that choose to make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. And if you haven't done so already, hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts as well as on YouTube, and then go sound off in the comments. Like, let us know who gets your game balls from this game, because when you win, you got to give out game balls. That's the way of things here, Cody. And so I think there's a number of different ways you could go. Obviously, we know that the Broncos, and Sean Payton said he gave a game ball to Quinn Miners, but you have Courtland Sutton atop the list. Now, I think he's a great candidate for a game ball, especially after what we saw in this very, I don't want to bring up these comparisons all that often, but this game and the way the passing game operated, it kind of reminded me of, the Tim Tebow, Eric Decker game against the Kansas City Chiefs a few years back, almost over a decade now at this point, but where there was just a couple passes needed for the Broncos to win that game. Dominating defense, run game played well, but the wide receiver needed to make a few plays. Courtland Sutton was that guy in this game for the Denver Broncos, catching 3 passes from Bo Nix, including touchdown number 1.
Yeah, and I think, you talk about the touchdown, but arguably one of the bigger plays of the game came on that 3rd and 11, and it was where Bo Nix just ripped an absolute throw across the middle on a dagger concept there. This was the same exact play design from the Broncos offense that Bo Nix missed against the Seattle Seahawks that went over Courtland's head. This was that same exact play design with Josh Reynolds coming up and freeing the safety there. That was a great play because he also ripped it in between 3 defenders, not like he put it into harm's way. He didn't do that, but there's a window where there's 3 defenders closing in on the area, and he just fits it into the window perfectly. That was a big-time throw there for Bo Nix. And look, you're going to continue to see people talking about, well, he only had 60 yards passing. What's bigger in the context of it, right? It was a remnants of a hurricane when we're talking about how this whole game kind of transpired here for Denver offensively. And look, I think the run game certainly did help, but that was a big-time throw in a big-time moment, and Courtland came up with a big-time catch. Not only there, but just going back and watching it once again, how he got both feet in bounds because the ball was a little bit high there. He still managed to get a heel down, the toe down, touchdown Denver. That was a difference-making drive here for the Broncos in Sunday's game. And so Courtland, obviously the recipient of the game ball because of his production, really the only production out of as a wide receiver in this game in terms of catching passes. He came up big when needed. And look, we talk so much about number 1 wide receivers. Is he a wide receiver 1? In this game, he certainly came up big as a wide receiver 1 when a rookie quarterback struggling in the elements needed him to come up with a big play. He certainly did that. There were a couple of shots downfield that I felt like were close, that Bo maybe missed a couple there, especially on one of the fade routes early on in the game. But I like the aggressiveness that Bo didn't shy away, and Courtland saying, hey, feed me, I'll come up with a big play. That's exactly what happened. He gets my game ball. If you had to hand out a game ball to anybody on offense, who would you give it to?
I'm giving a game ball to Javonte Williams, Cody. I've been harsh on him on this show.
Pick.
Somebody in the comments even pointed it out, and I think that it's valid. Like, we've been critical of Javonte Williams because they pointed it out on the broadcast. 13 straight games leading up to this Jets game, averaging less than 4 yards a carry. Now, you can blame the offensive line all you want for that. Unfortunately, I think most people would agree we just hadn't seen that same Javonte that we loved back in 2021 when he was running over folks and getting angry run scepters and things like that. This was the closest we've seen him to being that guy back from his rookie season. And 77 yards on 16 carries. That's not going to blow anybody away. It's not going to win, FedEx running back of the week or whatever that is at the ground, whatever the award is. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But it's not going to win any awards. But look, I think when you watch this game back and you see the way that Javonte played, he deserves a game ball absolutely for ripping off a number of big runs and getting the Broncos offense going and being that guy, dragging some tackle. He dragged Sauce Gardner there a little bit on one of his plays, reminiscent of that Baltimore Ravens run that he had a few years ago where he dragged almost the entire defense. So I love seeing that. The explosiveness, the quick twitch seemed to be back from him. And look, I love the fact that Sean gave Quinn Miners a game ball, because a lot of the biggest runs from Javonte were running off Quinn Miners' side of the field. So a job well done to those guys playing off of each other. And I think for me, Javonte gets that game ball. Your thoughts on that, as well as defensively for the Broncos, where I think there's plenty of game balls to be given out on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and to that point, look, 35 of Javonte's 77 rush yards came on that drive where Denver scored, where Courtland Sutton came up with the touchdown. And granted, on that same drive, Denver started off with a false start that backed them up to a 1st and 15. And then Jaleel McLaughlin, honorable mention to him, had 13 yards on 2 carries, to start that. Javonte picked up the first down on the very next play, and then Javonte started getting the high hand with a couple of big chunk runs, including a 16-yarder, a 12-yard. Like that right there was just fun to see, because it was a little bit of the old Javonte in terms of, hey, he's hitting the hole, he's seeing it. I thought his vision was significantly better in this game than what we saw in the first 3 games. And so for Javonte, can you build on that? Are you going to have more confidence there? I certainly think that is the possibility. It was great to see. Defensively, this was a tough one, right? Because I could go through and hand it out to a handful of players. I'm going to give it to Vance Joseph here in this situation. I think his defense is playing unbelievably well right now. When you factor in, I think the rate of turnovers they forced last year, how they had played after they made a lot of personnel changes, they started to incorporate more of Vance's defense. You've seen this defense start to hum, but now that you've made personnel upgrades on the defensive line, the front 7, it has made a drastic difference. Now, let's go through some of the numbers here. 4 of 17 holding the Jets on 3rd down, who are the previously number 1 ranked 3rd down offense in the league through 3 weeks of play. 14 quarterback hits. Aaron Rodgers was one of the least sacked quarterbacks in the first couple of weeks. I think most of the sacks that he had on him initially came in that week 1 game against the 49ers. Well, Denver's defense gets after him 5 times in this game. And then you look at it as well, according to our friends over there at NFL Next Gen Stats, because of the front 7 play, I think Pat Surtain is also playing even more elite at this point. According to NFL Next Gen Stats, against Garrett Wilson, 2 catches on 3 targets for 22 yards. Really, the questionable got his knee in bounds or out of bounds. They didn't have enough evidence to overturn it. There was just some plays there I'm watching, and it's going to be on my film review this week here on Mile High Sports YouTube page. For anyone who wants to see the film breakdowns, I know a lot of people subscribe to this channel because that's what we initially started as, but we can't do film breakdowns, or else Sayre and I would visually do them here on the show for you to see. He was impressive here once again, coming up and tackling like Surtain's not afraid to tackle. I'm going to give it to the defense here at this point. I want to know your thoughts on that in terms of how Vance has done, but also if you have to if you had to give 1 game ball to a player, who would it be?
Well, Vance obviously is deserving. I think he got a game ball last week as well, Cody, and certainly deserving again this week, just scheming it up exactly how the Broncos need. Through 4 games this season, 55 points allowed for that Denver Broncos defense. Through 4 games last season, 150 points allowed. Even if you take out the 70 points against Miami, and I mean, that's still 30 more points-ish, 30. Yeah. So to me, Cody, Vance has done such a great job of, turning from the guy that everybody loves to make fun of in Broncos country to now being that guy that's like, all right, do we have the best defensive coordinator in the league? Defensively, for me, I got to give out 2 game balls. It's kind of like the splitting a sack sort of situation, right?
Yeah.
And oddly enough, Malcolm Roach, one of the guys that I'm giving a game ball to, split a sack in this game for the Denver Broncos. 2 quarterback hits, just consistently disruptive on the defensive interior. I want to continue to highlight him as we did after the post game, because look, I feel like Malcolm Roach has been one of the most underrated additions to this defensive front for the Broncos. When you talk about formulating an identity on that side of the ball and really just winning at the line of scrimmage, he and John Franklin Myers and obviously Zach Allen and DJ Jones, they're doing such a great job of helping the Broncos accomplish that on the interior defensive line. So I think Malcolm Roach, with the way that he played against the Jets, and I can't wait to start seeing the all 22 stuff circulating. Can't wait to see your breakdowns of it, Cody. Malcolm Roach, I think, is going to be one of the biggest standout players for the Broncos there. And then just a quick shout out to Justin Sternad, who he had a sack the first play of the game, had a couple tackles for loss in this game, had really great coverage on a play. The Jets had a one-on-one matchup with Breece Hall that could have potentially gone for a touchdown if Sternad wasn't in good position. He was in great position and made a play in coverage. So to me, I feel like Sternad coming in with, I don't know what everybody's expectations were. I don't know that we necessarily even knew who was going to play next to Cody Barton in this game going into it, but Sternad was the guy. And I love that the Broncos got his feet wet right away with that blitz, and him having kind of that epiphany as he's sprinting towards Aaron Rodgers of like, I'm about to sack Aaron Rodgers in a game. Like, this has been a long time coming for the former 2020 draft pick who was supposed to play a huge role for Vic Fangio's defense. Now we're seeing it manifest here in 2024. You absolutely love to see it.
100%. Look, Broncos country, share with us your game balls, offense, defense. Is there anybody on special teams? We can't give Greg Zuerlein one for missing the field goal, but if there's any special team standouts as well, make sure you drop your game balls here on social media, or if you're watching on YouTube, let us know as you continue to rock with Locked On Broncos. What roster moves could Denver make? Look, we entertain the idea if Tyler Badie lands on IR, it frees up a roster space. We'll make the argument why the Broncos maybe need to elevate a practice squad tight end to the 53-man roster to get a boost of production at that position. We'll break that down here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And Game Time is the app where you can go and find tickets to your favorite events, whether that's sports, whether that's music, whether that's concerts, or even comedy events that are going on near you. Game Time has everything that you can be looking for. And on top of that, they have the best deals on tickets. Game Time, they also have a brand new feature that's called Game Time Picks, and that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier because Game Time Picks, they filter out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. So make sure you check it out. And inside the Game Time app, here's also what you get access to. You get seat views where you get a panoramic view of your seat, so you know exactly what your vantage point of the event that you're going to is going to look like to make sure you're getting the best seat in the house. So check it out today on the Game Time app. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. If the Broncos are going to make any roster moves this week, you can argue that they need to make it at the tight end position because they simply haven't gotten any production in the passing game from the tight end position itself, whether that's by design or whether that's by what the defense is doing to limit Denver offensively. There might need to be a little bit of a spark, and there's a 6'8" spark that could be a potential option here this week as Denver prepares for the Las Vegas Raiders. Once again, Broncos country, we appreciate you so much for tuning in, hanging out with us. It means the world to Sayre and I that you take time out of your day to listen to us wherever you get your podcast or even to watch us and engage in the YouTube comments on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. You make the show exactly what it is. Let's talk about some potential roster moves here, Sayre, though we kind of talked about as well. Let's operate here under the hypothetical. Let's say Tyler Badie lands on injured reserve. There are a couple of practice squad players that Denver could elevate to the active roster. I was looking at it overall here this week, and I was thinking in my head, okay, there's a lot of inside linebackers. There's Lavelle Bailey. There's Zach Cunningham. There's Quan Alexander. I think Quan could be an option. You look at different wide receivers. There's David Sills. There's Caden Davis. There's not a move really on the offensive side, really outside of tight end that I would make to elevate a guy. I would say it's either between Quan Alexander or Donald Parham Jr., the 6'8" tight end. If you could make the biggest argument right now between those two guys, who's got the best case and who would be the best boost considering where Denver's playing at defensively right now? May not want to mess with that. You may not need to elevate Quan just yet. You can do the practice squad to game day elevation, but if you had to promote someone to the 53, where would you go between these two guys?
Well, I think on paper, Donald Parham Jr. has the best case, for this team right now. And the biggest reason, Cody, as I watched back on this game from week 4, like Greg Dulcich really stood out to me, and not in a good way. I mean, the Broncos, when they have him out on the field there, they're not, when they were targeting him in the passing game, he wasn't making plays. And now when they're not targeting him in the passing game, you try to get out. I saw a couple of instances in this game against the Jets where the Broncos tried to get out a quick pass to Troy Franklin. Greg Dulcich has to get a block on a defensive back. He couldn't do it. It went for like a 4 or 5 yard loss there in the first half. And the other thing happened on the other side of the field. At another point, Broncos tried to get something going in the quick passing game. You need Greg Dulcich to come up with a block there out in space against a defensive back. He couldn't. get the job done. And since we're not seeing Dulcich make plays in the passing game, whether he is targeted or whether he's not targeted, like you said, if it's by design or if it's simply because of, Dulcich not getting the job done, whatever the case may be, you may just need to switch some things around there. So does Lucas Kroll need to be activated from, for a game here? Do you need to bring up Donald Parham Jr. and just try a number of different things right now? Because nobody at tight end is making plays. Nate Adkins, Adam Troutman, those guys might be getting the job done as blockers, but when we need somebody to convert and move the chains on third downs as a receiving option, I mean, there's nobody available. So I don't know. Maybe that's it, Cody. Maybe it is bringing up that 6'8" weapon that you have at the tight end position to say, hey, you got a big catch radius here. Find him on third down, and he's done that. He's got a lot of touchdowns, a lot of first downs in his career. He's done a good job of at least getting that done. So I would bring him up for this game, Cody, and we've been talking about this for a couple weeks now.
Yeah, and here's the dilemma that I have as well. When you look at this team and you look at the tape on offense in the first 4 weeks, I think it's safe to say that there is no joker. Like, there is no joker emphasis in terms of what we're seeing in terms of guys being put in positions. Sean Payton doesn't have a joker in terms of this roster right now. I don't think that's going to rear its head maybe for another year or two, depending on how things go. But I also want to maybe throw this into the mix as well. Should Denver go with more heavy wide receiver usage at this point in the passing game than they do tight ends? I think Nate Adkins, Adam Troutman, as you mentioned, doing a great job blocking and helping out there. If you want to go 12 personnel, I trust those guys out there in that position more than anything right now. But do you maybe go with more wide receivers? Now, the case in the point that I want to make here is Devon Vele, healthy scratch this past week in favor of Troy Franklin, who, yes, you want to see more of Troy Franklin. Devon Vele's had a great offseason, but the injury impacted him in the lineup in the rotation with Lil Jordan Humphrey on the 53-man roster, with Marvin Mims there as well, with Courtland Sutton, with Josh Reynolds. It's hard to feed all those mouths in terms of what you want to do from a receiving standpoint. So it does impact Vele that the injury has kept him off of the field. But now the emergence of Troy Franklin being more involved in the game plan, to me, I think that's a more promising sign than ever. To get Vele back in the mix, do you maybe minimize what you do with the tight end? I think this is a very, very good question here that we'll have for Sean Payton and the offense this week, specifically against the Raiders.
Well, and I think it's a valid option too, because it's not like Vele could do worse in terms of blocking than Greg Dulcich at this point, at least from what I saw, Cody, in this game. And maybe the film reviews will show us otherwise. But on my second watch of the game, that was one of the areas that Dulcich could have really helped this team get the quick passing game going, get some guys out in space, specifically Troy Franklin. And it just didn't work out because he didn't block his guy. So I don't know that Vele could do worse than that. I don't know that Parham could do worse than that, but I like the idea of going a little bit heavier at receiver and figuring out, hey, can we get anything going? Because if Courtland Sutton is the only guy making plays and we're only seeing 3 or 4 plays per game, like, that's a huge issue for this offense. The Broncos need some of these playmakers to step up. And if it requires getting all of them active for a game and saying, here's a package of plays for you and for you and for you, and we're going to see who maximizes their opportunities, then so be it, because we're not seeing involvement from Marvin Mims. We expected a breakout from him this year. That's not happening. We expected, Courtland Sutton's 2023 to be his new floor. I don't even know if that has happened based on what we've seen so far this season. You expect Josh Reynolds, whose quarterback rating when targeted last year was like 121 something. That he's had a couple of big drops in the first month of the season, including on third and short yesterday. And so to me, Cody, when you look at all these different guys, all these pieces, that it's like, man, the Broncos may have an embarrassment of riches at wide receiver. Nobody's really stepping up on a consistent basis. So you might as well throw them all out there and see what happens.
I say you got to figure that out, who your personnel is. I like what you mentioned about maybe Lucas Kroll seeing something different. But yeah, like Greg Dulcich, I think has been at best, when you look at the passing game, has been really a decoy. Like, there's times where he's running a safety off, which is great. But when you're not getting in terms of the production from the position itself, where, hey, you once again don't have a lot of catches at your tight end position, to me, it is a little bit concerning. Granted, I will say, I think the New York Jets game offensively, when you look at how everything had went, the flow of it, all the remnants of a post-hurricane, I think, okay, maybe that had an impact on what they wanted to do in the passing game. Certainly, it impacted Bo's ability to throw. It impacted Aaron's ability to throw, contrary to what a lot of people are debating and whining about right now on social media, that, oh my God, he only had 60 yards. Rodgers at times dirted several throws, and you could see Rodgers on the broadcast, even in the second half, looking at his hands and trying to wipe it off. It impacted both quarterbacks in this game. Ultimately, Denver came out with a win. Bo Nix protected the football, didn't get sacked. And now I think you have a clean surface, which the weather should be great in Denver this week against the Raiders. I'm excited to see what Denver can do, but I think you have to maybe spread it out, add some more wide receiver weapons into the mix, because the tight end position in the passing game simply is non-existent right now. Could it get going this week? Certainly possible, but we haven't seen it through 4 weeks. So what's to make us say, okay, hey, in week 5, it's suddenly going to happen? Change it up a little bit and see what happens here, because as we always love to point out, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Can the Broncos avoid insanity this week? We'll see. That's the case. But Broncos Country, we appreciate you rocking with us here today, making us your first listen. Tomorrow's episode of the show, Sayre and I, we're going to answer some mailbag questions to really summarize the show here as we get ready for Raiders week. Then you can expect later on this week, Sayre to sit down with your boy Q, host of Locked On Raiders, for a crossover Thursday episode, plus the Broncos back at practice on Wednesday. I'll be there. We'll give you all the post-practice recap coverage of all things orange and blue that you need this week here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. For your second listen, go check out the brand new formatted Locked On NFL, a morning show and then the afternoon you get a second version where it's more laid back. It's like a barbershop style of format with Tony Wiggins. You get that Locked On NFL. Thanks for making us your first listen. We'll see you tomorrow for the mailbag episode, Locked On Broncos.